To order, Water and Sewer Authority of Cabarrus County, February 16th. Before we get started, thank you, the boards, for your indulgence when I've been out a few meetings, and Jeff, thank you for filling in for me. That was a tough time with the stars didn't align right with being absent, but I appreciate you letting me do that. So we have first unfinished business. We do have one change to the January 19th minutes. There's a motion about prime beverage that says Mr. Marshall made the motion. Mr. Marshall wasn't at that meeting, so it was just a typo. It should be Mr. Ritchie. So with that change, is there a motion to approve the January 19th minutes?
So approved. Second.
Okay, we've got a motion, second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carried. We will move to new business. Michael, we have a annexation request from the city of Concord. Can you walk us through that?
We have been dealing with the county over a number of years. They really don't have a zoning for water and sewer plants. We are conditional or special use under the regular residential zoning requirements, and each time we need to make a change in our layout of our facilities, we have to go back before the board and go through a series of meetings and neighborhood meetings and public hearings and a number of other issues. We understand that if we're under the city of Concord's Industrial 1, they have a zoning for wastewater or utilities. We wouldn't have to go through all those steps as long as we documented their approval. What we're doing, what we're doing with the design build, occasionally we have to move facilities around just for ease of construction or conflicts or things like that. And as we move into the phase 4, there's some other things we need to move around. So in order to avoid all these different delays that we may incur in going back and forth, after we find out we need to move something to a new location, we feel like it'd be much easier and more speedier for us to go with the Concord annexation and get under their zoning. So that's the board approved me and our staff to go through the process of the city of Concord annex sewer plant.
Any questions?
Is that an application procedure? And we would actually be requesting I-1? Or would they just let us know that
I think
this is I-1?
I think they would let us know. I don't think they have to ask for it.
Yeah, so it's really a two-step process because it'd be an annexation application. And in addition to that, it'd be a zoning map amendment application. And so I think it would be permitted under I-1 or I-2. And I think city staff was kind of thinking I-1 maybe makes the most sense. But that would get applied by the city. And then just as far as the process goes, we would start working on the application if you authorize it tonight. And then the idea would be we file those applications, they go through city staff for various approvals. And then if everything goes well, we would be on city council agenda for April. And then the zoning would get applied in May. So we would be done with the process in May. It's probably a 2 or 3 month process.
Well, you and I've talked about this for years, going back to Mr. Kaiser complaining about. I said, get annexed, you don't pay taxes, and it makes sense. City again is more used to dealing with treatment plants, and it just I think it makes perfect sense. You do have a couple of open stormwater permits, but they're used to making the transition and working with Concord staff to make sure that we don't get any sideways with the state and feds. So that'll be easy.
So does anybody see any downside for anybody? I'm not hearing any.
Staff has it, and we asked William to look into it, and he didn't come back with any turns. So as far as we.
Yeah, and we've had multiple projects over the last 5-8 years that's actually turned into the critical path of trying to get that zoning approval for very types of projects around the plant. So I do think it will provide short and long-term benefits, because we're we're gonna have some real impacts that this will have in the next 12 to 18 months. That is gonna be critical with keeping the project moving and keeping things on schedule and it'll be nice to have that be a little more streamlined.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve WSAC staff to seek annexation of the wastewater treatment plant by the city of Concord and to secure whatever zoning is appropriate for that facility.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. That motion did authorize you to execute all the agreements necessary, because I'm sure there will be a lot of things to sign, so. All right, moving on. Wendy, you're gonna talk about a budget amendment.
Sure, and I'm coming for you tonight to ask for a budget amendment to increase our utilities by $500,000. To cover this, we'll appropriate retained earnings. There's a new, so after the budget was complete, we were notified by the city of Concord Electric System that there would be a purchase power adjustment that's been sometimes over $50,000 a month. So this budget amendment will cover that additional charge per month. Any questions?
Any questions for Wendy? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve the budget amendment?
So moved.
Motions or second?
Second.
Motion second. Any questions, comments? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that motion carries. Okay, Wendy's got a resolution to talk us through.
This resolution will allow us to join the North Carolina Investment Pool. This would be another similar mutual fund like the trust. It has in the last several months, when I was looking, the interest rates were slightly higher. It's a liquid short-term investment, just like I said, just another option for us to invest our funds to get better interest rates. Asking for approval of the resolution to join the North Carolina Investment Pool.
Any cost or any?
The costs are very similar to the trust.
Move to approve, Mr. Chairman.
All right, got a motion. I got a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. Thank you, Woody. Okay, let's roll on to a discussion of wastewater capacity.
I sent out the memo and indicated what the allocation would be if we went with a straight 5-year below. Chad and I discussed it, and he's put together some information about where we've been and where we are right now. We thought that might be helpful before we started the discussion about how to allocate flows, so you can see really what's been going on the last few years, who's actually been using their flow and on what purpose they've been using it. So he has a series of slides and some narratives that'll kind of be a lead into the discussion, we hope.
All right, well, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, thank you for having me tonight. I've got a good bit of numbers to go over here with, and I tried to de-engineer it as best I could to make it as smooth as I can. But one thing I want to point out before we start into any of this, everything that you're going to see here are real numbers. Okay, there's no projections, there's no assumptions. This is all building permit, system development fee, flow acceptance that was actually accepted, updates from the member jurisdictions to how many homes are completed in a subdivision and how many aren't. These are all real numbers. So there's one calculation at the end we'll get into that's a simple one, but everything else is real numbers as we move through this. Okay. First, to start, I want to update you with where we're at capacity wise. So as we know, we're permitted 26.5 MGD. 2022, our average flow is 21.11. That was slightly higher, about 160,000 gallons, I think, higher than 2021. But as you see, it's a little less than 80% of capacity. Okay, so we are not, as we've talked about before, we are not out of capacity from a treatment standpoint. Next line there is the developer control capacity. You've heard that talk about the flow that's accepted but not yet connected and everything. We've decided to recoin that into developer control capacity because that's really flow that has been accepted, and now it's the developers to use, and to use that number. And then we have the jurisdictional control capacity, which is the flow that has been allocated out to our 5 jurisdictions to be used towards projects. As I said below, there's a footnote there, the developer control capacity is capacity that's been officially allocated to a specific project through the flow acceptance process.
Chad, how long is that developer control good for from the time it's issued?
They have 2 years to start significant installation of water and sewer infrastructure. Once they start significant installation, if they do that within 2 years, there is no sunset on that. It could take them 10 years. Luckily, I don't think we really see that necessarily, but we'll get into that a little bit more here in a few slides. Right here is just a slide to show, going back to 2017, how our flow has grown. 2017 was our last dry year. And you can see 17 MGD. We made that rapid jump there in 2018 and another big jump in 2022. Those 2 years happen to be two of the wettest years we've ever had in Cabarrus County. We've talked about these numbers quite a bit. The one I want to point out here is the bottom green ticks there. That's Charlotte Water's flow. The top are Cabarrus County flow. Over this time period, Cabarrus County is up about 23%. Charlotte Water's up just a little under 27%. So it's been running pretty even between Charlotte, maybe a little faster than ours, but running pretty even through there. If you look at this over a 6-year swing, it shows that our average flow is up over 800,000 gallons a day. Okay, that can be a little deceiving because if you look from 2018 to 2022, we're only up a little over 1 million gallons in 5 years. That's 200,000 gallons a year. A lot of that has been impacted by the fact our first year on here was a very dry year. And then we've had wet to above average years following that. Talking about the developer control capacity pot that is there. Currently, that's 3.22 NGD. This includes projects dating back to 2017. These projects from 2017 are a very small percentage, but it should be noted that some projects take over 5 years to complete. Just as we were just talking about, it takes some time to complete some of these. 2.3 MGD of the developer control pot is residential. The remainder, 0.92, is commercial industrial capacity. So, 2/3 residential, 1/3 commercial industrial, somewhere in that ballpark is where that split kind of comes out. I will say that 0.92 is probably higher than it normally would be because that does include that first hit of Red Bull. So over half of that pot is Red Bull. All right. This right here is the same time period. And what this is looking at is flow acceptance, residential flow acceptance. So this is dwelling unit data. So this is not flow, this is not bedroom, this is number of dwelling units per jurisdiction that was accepted each year. And this is residential only. So as you can see, we had a fairly slow year in 17, moved up in 18, down some in 19, then a big year in 2020, big year in 2021, and then moderated some in 22 in the amount of flow acceptance we had. But as you can see, and I think we talked about that at the time, 20 and 21, those 2 years, we almost accepted 3 or 4 years worth of flow just in those 2 years. It was quite dramatic at that time. And as you see through this, Concord predominantly is usually the majority of them, but you can see we got 2 years, 19 and 22, where Kannapolis had more dwelling units flow acceptance than Concord did. So it does vary from year to year. And one project that's 200 or 300 homes can dramatically swing these numbers when you're looking at them at a year by year period.
Was 17 and 22 0 for Harrisburg, or you just didn't have reporting
They
data?
were 0, correct.
Oh, okay.
They were 0.
That's sort of surprising.
Yeah, it was.
There's never been.
Yeah, it was to me too.
0? Wow.
It was. All right, and so this graph came out a little bit different, but this is by type of dwelling unit. Main thing I want to point out here, this is following the same numbers here when you get into a total number per year. But I would like to point out that the green and the red, so the green here is townhomes, the red is apartment, and the blue is single family home. So what I want to point out is in 2020, we kind of made that shift where we went more than 50% are townhomes and apartments. Maybe this year we went that 21, we went about 60% was. Then we look in 22, we were like 80% of residential dwelling unit connections were townhomes or apartments. So I think we all see that in construction as we ride around or in projects that are going on. But just wanted to point out that the single family residential home, we haven't been seeing as many of those, a lot more of the apartments.
Well, and why that's important is that's instant sewer impacts
That's right.
compared to 5-6 year sewer impacts.
Well, I would think so, but our numbers will show us that that's not really what's playing out
So as
here.
far as apartments and townhomes, are they treated the same as single family dwellings? Just
Yes.
depending on number of units and
Yes.
bedrooms?
So the only difference is, well, it's not a difference, but the only thing, if you have a 1-bedroom apartment, it's treated as a 2.
There's no one bedroom.
So you can't do, at the 80 gallons per bedroom, you can't do 80 gallons for one, but you have to do 160 as a minimum on that. But when it comes to system development fees, when they connect, they're handled the same as a single family home. So a lot of that, now they do flow less, we've proven that.
Right, but as far as our paper capacity, it's still tied up
Correct.
in a
Correct.
200 unit apartment building instead of 200 single family dwellings.
Correct. So then, as we move, this is commercial industrial flow acceptance. You can see this runs pretty even year in, year out. And I too see some of you taking notes and stuff. I'm planning on sending this presentation out to everybody for you to have, to use and to go through yourself as well, or use it with your boards or your jurisdiction. But you'll see this stays pretty flat around 200,000 gallons per year. 21 obviously was impacted by Red Bull that moved that up dramatically there. Then, all right, there's a lot going on here. All right, so we'll take a few minutes here. First thing I'd point out is the line starting with the blue line at the top. So the red and the blue lines are up here. Okay, this is projects that were accepted in 17 and 18. So these are projects that flow acceptance has taken place in the past 5-6 years, 7 years. It shows that at our update in December, they were 2018 was actually 100% done. 2019 still had 20 units that hadn't been completed in a project somewhere. So or 17, excuse me, 2017 had 20 units that were not complete. So you can see those that you go back 5-6+ years, they're pretty much done, pretty much completed. We moved down to projects that were approved in 19. Now, keep in mind, a project that was approved in January of 19 has now had their flow acceptance in hand for 4 years. Okay. Those projects are running about 70%, 69% completed. Okay. I don't know if that's a good number or a bad number, but it shows you there are still 593 actual dwelling units that have been approved for at least 3 years that are not complete. This is the one that's more telling. You drop to these projects here. Again, you got your approval in January of 21. You have had your flow acceptance in hand for 3 years. Okay. At a minimum, you've had your flow acceptance for 25 months at this point. And we have 2,028 dwelling units that have not been completed yet. Only 34% of projects that were completed 25 months or more, have not been brought online yet. You go to the projects that are 1 to 2 years old, we're only at 7%. I think in normal conditions that those bottom numbers there would be a little higher than that. It kind of seemed like, there to have a combined almost 5,000 dwelling units that have been approved in the 1 to 3 year time period in the housing market that we've seen in our area, those would have been built, completed, and online quicker than they have been. All told, right now there are 7,038 dwelling units. This is not a calculation. This is actual dwelling units, residential only, that have flow acceptance, that are developer controlled, that have not been built right now. Okay, as I said, this is not taking some hypothetical flow, calculating an assumed gallons per, this is actual from the updates that we do with the jurisdictions. This is the actual number as of January 1st of 2023. Does anybody have any questions on that? 'Cause I know there's a lot of information right there.
What does that translate to in gallons per day?
That's what I was gonna.
Well,
ask too.
because each dwelling unit could be it could be 2 bedrooms, it could be 4 bedrooms, quickly, if you were 250 gallons per, let's say even if you were just 250 per, then 7,038 times 250, that's 1.76 MGD.
Right, that's a big number.
Yeah, and to assume that we have them down at 80 gallons per bedroom, they're actually gonna flow about 45. So about 40% of this number, theoretically, if it was connected, would then be available to apply to new projects. So you would have, 800,000 gallons or so of new capacity, not new capacity, but newly available capacity to allocate to projects.
Are any of those 7,000 units in projects that might be in danger of the 2-year window? Or are they all under construction, the projects?
Right, so this number that's down here, so the 1 to 2 years, plus the projects that were approved in 2022. Those could, there's some projects that we look at that have not started yet. We did not have any in this update, did we?
I don't believe so. Typically, there are very few,
Yes.
with each 6-month update that we do.
So I got a call from a developer the other day that just acquired a project that had gotten their flow acceptance in May of 21. And they were wanting to understand, what does this mean? And I said, you've got to have what does significant mean? I said, there's got to be pipe, manholes in the ground, and you've got to have a contractor actively working, installing. So this doesn't mean that the pipe's been delivered. It doesn't mean you can show me a PO for manholes. It doesn't mean any of that. It means that infrastructure is going in the ground.
So it means, Chad, that even if we had all 7,000+ of them instantaneously available and connected and consuming, that we would still have plenty of cushion between the total flow and the permitted flow
Correct.
that you're talking about. So we can go to Diener and say over and over, there's still plenty of cushion when we're asking you to consider 60 versus 80 or whatever happens.
So real rough numbers there. If you had 1.7 million gallons and you said, okay, when this connects, it's going to generate an actual 900,000 gallons a day. Well, that means our average daily flow goes from 2.1 to 2.
Right.
We're still way under 26.5. But now we have, 800,000 gallons that's now available to allocate out to projects that come along. There is the flaw in the math that they do. They're trying to stack conservatism to the point that you can never fully utilize your resource. And that's a point we're pushing with them, that it's impossible to ever fully utilize your capacity at your plant when you're having to do a calculation that way. You can never divide a number by 2 and get to 0. It's kind of that same, you can get close, but you can never get there. And it's kind of the same thing here. You can never get there when you're allocating this way.
I think that would be a great a great tool of information to put that together in very simplified form as you have, and say that to Senator Newton, that you're still in the right path, Senator Newton. You're still pushing for something that is still viable and plenty of cushion along the way, and give him the information. So somewhere along, we need to be talking about how we can share it with him again.
Okay. And I have been engaged with his staff every couple of days working on stuff to do with this. So that is, it really shows the impact. And that was one reason that we wanted to kind of make the shift of not calling this the flow accepted, but not yet connected. But it's the developer controlled pot. You guys control when this gets built and when more capacity becomes available through this. So
Let me ask you a
Yes.
question, Ken. For the permit of allocation to be administered, do they have to have the building permits secured all first? Are these 7,900, do they already have building
No.
permits?
no. So they have to have approved construction drawings from through the jurisdiction and have gone through all their rezoning, annexing, have all their construction drawings approved, the city or town sign off on the project, and officially the town or city accept flow to that project, then we also in parallel accept flow to that project. Once they have flow acceptance, then they can really start their grading and curb and gutter and put in their sewer, and then they would go get their building permits to build the individual unit. So it could easily be 6 months, a year, 2 years between when you get full acceptance and you pull a building permit. Yes.
And that's part of the other problem. It's got such a long lead time that even though we've got flow acceptance, there is no impact on the stream for years to come. And that's that extra cushion of safety that we should be telling the state that they already have along the way.
And that's where we feel like you said with Senator Newton or others, this provides real information. Like I said, when I started, this is real numbers. There's no projections. There's no anything. This is the real numbers to show that, hey, after 25 months, I mean, projects on average are only a third of them even online. At 4 years, some of them aren't, but 70% online. That they're not. It's not going to come on in 18 months. It just doesn't work that way. So, all right, this is commercial industrial. Very different looking graph. As you can see, we do have the bottom line here. Our 2021 is predominantly Red Bull and is down still low. But as you can see, those projects that are from 2019, 18, 17, they get completed. I mean, so you're here, 2020 projects were 34% done on the other graph. And they are 87% done from a commercial industrial. So they're really not the problem. They get their flow acceptance and they build their project and they get their projects done. All right, this is actual system development fee building permit information over the same time period. So this is looking at residential only. So this is looking at our 5/8 connections and then our apartments per month. As you can see, when we look at this from a cumulative number, 126 goes to 155, 210, we peak at 238, 171, now we're back down to 131. So this is an average month on a yearly basis. Now, Mr. Chairman, talking to your comment earlier, with us having predominantly apartments approved for the last 2 to 3 years, I would anticipate there being a lot more than 19 and 34 apartments per month coming online than what we're actually seeing. So what we're seeing from the real data is for the last 24 to 36 months, we have approved a lot of apartments, but they're not coming online. And I don't really know where those are. I don't know what's driving that. I'll have available a copy for each jurisdiction of these projects that went to this data. Some of you may already have it, but so you can have the actual data that went to these projects. But it was surprising to me the way we've seen, not only we've seen 5/8 connections slow down back to 2017 levels, but we have apartments too. So you can see they're basically right on where they were in 17, and so are 5/8 inch connections. And
I guess what's the start point to that? When do you say it's connected? I mean,
when it's completed and occupied. And so there could be some big projects out there that swing, but see, this data though here comes from when the building permit's pulled. So to correct that, this data comes from when the building permit's pulled for that unit. Okay. So this does not have to do, so when it comes off of the developer controlled pot is when it's actually occupied. This data was driven from the building permit
I
information.
mean, it can take a year for a large apartment project to be constructed, but once it's done, it all flows at once. I mean, within a few months. I mean,
Correct.
pre-leased and it doesn't take.
But the flip side of that, all those building permits should get pulled at the same time too.
It's just one building permit, or I assume.
Well, no, they pay a system development fee for each
Yeah,
unit.
for each unit, but
Correct. And this could be skewed just a little bit. We did have a few projects that were master metered. And that they worked their way around a little bit of that language because they had mixed use in the bottom and apartments up top. And they had few of those things that we had to clean up, but that's not a majority of them. So we do still have a large component of apartments that are not being constructed and brought online from the numbers, it appears. I will say that the 238 that we saw back in 2020 is the highest year within WSAC's record for residential connections on a per month basis. So 238 is the max we've ever seen. And we're down about 40% from that number at current rates for on an average monthly number. All right, we're jumping back to actual flow acceptance numbers here. So we're not looking at building permits. We're looking at the actual data that we looked at earlier on graphs of flow acceptance. This is residential flow acceptance per jurisdiction, and this is dwelling units. Okay, so we're not looking at flow. We're not looking at bedrooms. We're looking at the number of dwelling units. And we're looking at where those were applied or what jurisdictions those went through. Here you can kind of capture, and we talked about earlier, we noticed the 0 and the 0 for Harrisburg. Those are the same numbers that was in that graph that we were looking at earlier from that standpoint here. So if you look at the numbers, they can jump around a little bit, but when you get down to the 5-year averages, the bottom 2 lines here, the dark bolded one is the averages from the data above. So that is the average over the last 6 years. What percentage of dwelling units per jurisdiction. And then you can look at the 5-year average flow below that has been used per the interlocal agreement. And this is the updated number that's been used per the interlocal agreement. It is pretty interesting that they're pretty daggum close to each other. Running within a few percentages of each other from what actually has been accepted over the last 6 years per jurisdiction. And what we see historically flow through there. And that, as I noted there, this is the same average flow that's used for the capacity distribution for the interlocal agreement. Any questions on that data? Okay. All right, so a few notes to kind of summarize a little bit of this. As I said earlier, there's currently 3.22 MGD of developer control capacity at the Rocky River plant. 2.3% or 2.3 million of that is future residential connections, and this is 7,038 units. Around 2/3 of residential projects approved in 2020 have not been completed as of January 1st. At the 2022 rate of 131 residential building permits, it will take over 53 months for just the currently approved residential connections to be completed. So that's saying if we kept building at the rate that we're building right now, and we did not accept another flow acceptance, it would take them 4.5 years just to build the 7,000 residential units that are currently developer controlled that has flow acceptance. I also want to note that, the additional 2.1 MGD of new capacity will be coming online a little over a year from now. And again, just drive home that our actual daily flows at the plant are running under 80% of total capacity. So we do not have a compliance problem from a treatment standpoint. And I just want to kind of drive that back home. With that, does anybody have any questions? I know that was a lot of information. Hopefully it was clear enough and helpful to you guys.
Chad, just to clarify, 2 years. And who determines what's the terminology used? Significant.
But so we have, in my time here that I've been involved with it, I think we had one project one time that the developer tried to argue. Well, they had the pipe out there and they had the manhole there. Their contractor just hadn't shown up yet. And they were trying to show us text messages where he was going to be there a month ago and then he didn't show up and all that deal. Those get tough because the developers invested all the money. They got the pipe there, but by the word, they haven't substantially installed anything. So those can get tough. If they've got one stick of pipe and one manhole in, but it's obvious that they just did that just to pacify it and they don't have a contractor around and they just did that to me. Well, Okay, well, that's not really significant. But so that's a tough one. When you get down to it legally, I'm calling William and asking him, well, what can we do here? And it's not an easy decision. We don't have a hard, fast definition. Is that 10%, 20%? You know, what that is, and we may want to look at that, of cleaning that up.
So what happens on the ones that aren't hard to call? They don't have any pipe, they don't have any man-made, they haven't started
It's
even
revoked.
digging roads.
It's revoked, so the flow acceptance is revoked, it's no longer applicable, they're notified of that, the jurisdiction's notified of that. And that capacity goes back to the pot to be distributed at the next 6-month update. And it has happened, it just doesn't happen a lot, I think it's gonna be more prevalent.
And we may want to tighten that up.
Yeah.
To be, you know,
So who's responsible for looking at them after 2 years?
Okay.
Is that WSAC responsibility?
So that is what we handle through the every 6-month update with the jurisdiction. So there's a spreadsheet sent by WSAC out to the jurisdictions saying these are all the projects that at the last update still had homes or still weren't complete. And we add the new projects that have been approved since then. Give us the update on the status of these projects. Every now and then we'll get a status update back, and it could be from any jurisdiction that we're like, that seems weird. Like that doesn't seem right. And we'll ride out there and check the project and see, you know, kind of, is this right or is this not? But we usually don't walk too gray of a line there. I mean, we haven't experienced that yet. But we do try to keep it pretty uniform with everybody, each jurisdiction is getting handled the same way because we know legally anything could come up at any time. So we try to stay pretty as uniform as possible to handle things.
And is this policy written down somewhere? Are developers aware of this policy whenever they?
It's clearly stated in their flow acceptance, clearly accepted, stated in the flow. And if y'all have similar wording in y'all's, the flow acceptance they get from you guys too, correct? Here's another thing to keep in mind, a project that gets flow acceptance from WSAC always has flow acceptance from somebody else. That's also involved in that.
it's great information. Yeah, it's helpful.
Like I said, we will be sending this out to the board for you to have to digest better, to use with your staff, your boards, your counter, whatever. If you get into it and you have questions, like I just don't remember exactly what this means, don't hesitate to call or email, and I'll be happy to clarify any way I can, for sure.
It has a list of all the projects that are currently outstanding by jurisdiction that you can give you, so you can see where your capacity is tied up and what progress they have made in getting their project complete, whether it's apartments or homes or industrial.
If your eyes aren't great, you might want to grab the magnifying glass, because to get all the data, all of it on one sheet, it's a little small, but I think everybody will be okay. If I can read it, I can.
All right, any other questions for Chad? All right, thank you, Chad. All right, when do we got a quarterly financial report?
You know what, now it's time for you guys to discuss what you want to do.
Oh, so is there action?
Well, it's just for you to, you weren't here last time.
No,
The
I
board
wasn't.
decided they would have a work session
Okay,
uh,
let's talk.
during the meeting and see if we can make any progress during the session about where we wanted to go in this next allocation of 2.1 million. So we could go ahead and start planning and getting those agreements through jurisdictions.
Is the central question is if the percentage is going to change? Is that what's
Are
on
we
the
gonna-
table?
Are we gonna go with the five-year average percentages that calculated and allocated based, these gallons be allocated in this manner? Or are we gonna modify them in some way? And last time we had the allocation of a base per amount, and then we did the allocation.
Yeah, and I mean, I've looked at what some sort of base amount may look like. I guess part of my concern, and I think we discussed this openly last time, Mount Pleasant needs enough to do something with. But it looks like they still have the whole chunk that we the big base that we gave them last time is still intact. So that's really, in my mind, the only question I have about that base is do we do that, again? And stack more on top of that original base that they appear to not have utilized yet? Because ultimately that comes out of ours, and filters down to the other two, typically when you do the math, so. And when I see Harrisburg, obviously economic conditions are big, but when I see Harrisburg is sort of dropped off, like off the,
Scratch on it.
yeah, it's crazy.
I don't.
It's
I
crazy.
don't know how that works.
It's crazy.
So was the intent last time on that front end piece to do just that, to say if we divide it in percentages, then there's not really gonna be enough to
Can't do anything.
Okay, so that was the original intent of, yeah, I would. Second.
And then there was kind of a fairness of, we established that base, we actually gave it to everybody, including ourselves, and then we negotiated to give that base, our base away.
The alternative is just to go straight flow with no base, just base it purely on the numbers. I mean, that is one option, right?
Right.
Just-
And the smaller units argue we can never grow.
Chad, you want to jump in?
I would note too, that we're looking at a lot bigger number this time. Last time, part of the problem was that we were only looking at about 1 million gallons. And so Mount Pleasant was getting like 1.4% of 1 million gallons. It was only like 14,000 gallons. This time, their 1.43% of 2.1 million will be 30,000 gallons, enough for 125 homes. So I do think that last time, part of it was because we just didn't have that big of a number for those percentages to go against. Whereas this time, even without a base, Harrisburg will be over 200,000 gallons that they're doing. You know, there's just a bigger number this time.
The other option, and I don't know what this looks like, is to sort of merge this with what's actually happening on the ground based on some of your other numbers, but that's probably messy and complicated.
What I think that's what was interesting to see, what's happened on the ground for the last 6 years is essentially,
But it's different. I mean,
but
you're
it's,
talking about,
but it was interesting to see it was that close.
yeah, but if you're talking about 4%, that's not a small number, so.
Yeah.
And then I think the other thing that is different this time, right? So we've got a debt service payment that is going to be built into that rate structure, right? So if we're, let's take year one, right? So if Concord is 59.43% of the flow, our system and our customers are carrying essentially 60% of that debt service payment. But if we only receive 57%, right? So we're paying based on it's just another weird consideration this time because we actually have a pretty significant financial implication that we didn't have the first time.
And again, for both Kannapolis and Concord, you've had more requests than you've actually had allocation.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Stating the obvious there. Do we know how Harrisburg ended up request to allocation? Did they exceed their requests?
So from my understanding, Harrisburg has a list much long, a request for capacities that are much more than they have capacity, that they've taken the path to be very selective on the projects.
So then the
I
next,
got a list, but there's zero permit.
Yeah.
I'm just,
the next one,
They've had some commercial, we've had a decent amount of commercial come through Harrisburg, but there's no residential this year.
and then Mount Pleasant has less requests than they have allocation, but that allocation that won't go away, right?
No.
So the argument that, there needs to be some base, otherwise you wouldn't be able to do any project of any size. They got that base that allows that, so that's still in place.
I will also say, the gate says, well, if you're not using it, you lose it, but we had this debate with our city council recently, we've got to have some capacity to have in reserve just for what we don't know, especially economic development, wet months and wet years. And so, we got to be careful about that too. Maybe that's a standard, maybe we should come up with about some percentage, but we don't want any of the jurisdictions to hoard it for no real reason.
I wrote that down because is there any discussion around, what did you call it, developer controlled? Is there any discussion around municipal control?
Right.
I mean, let's be honest, if if you're not gonna use the capacity, now, I do agree with you. I think there's a balance of what the discussions that each board is having of the plan of action, right? We have a bucket for economic development. We know there's a large project, whatever that might be. And I don't know how you get into that, but I have to say that there's, especially because we're at a stopgap. This is not like we're holding on to a resource that hopefully our master plan will then get us to the point of having the ability to move through this. So it's like holding the cake right now that the baker's back there making more cake. We just don't know. I definitely wrote that point down of like, could that be a point of discussion as well?
I know Mount Pleasant's not here, but I do want to mention, we are aware that there's a large project being graded out there. They have made some preliminary inquiries on that, but they haven't actually submitted the actual paperwork for the capacity. So I think they do have actual plans for that.
They do. It'll be fourth
Capacity.
quarter. I talked to Chad today. It'll be fourth quarter. So.
Yeah, and they actually have sent in a request for, or have a flow acceptance that's been approved for the pump station to serve that site. But we have not received flow acceptance for that site, but there's actually two projects that appears in the works down there that's going to use the majority of their capacity.
Probably the only way
Is
this,
that their percentage capacity or their baseline?
What they have currently in hand, the currently controlled capacity.
probably the only way this works is to, if we go to I'm not advocating we do or don't go on use it or lose it kind of policy, but if we did, we probably need as a board come up with some metrics or parameters that everybody has to abide by for reserves and for you can't just hoard it for something that may happen. Maybe some of that you can, but just not all of it. So, we just got to find buckets that we would all agree to. So you don't just, like you said, stack it on each year and all of a sudden you've got all this capacity that we could have all used. So I don't know what that looks like. That's complicated probably. And maybe we're overplaying this. Maybe the numbers we're talking about aren't that big to worry much about it being hoarded. I see 0 permits and 0 flow changes and just it makes you wonder if we don't need to.
Well, we have to remember too, that political shifts can happen.
Yeah.
And that, in my opinion, is probably a reflection of that.
I think some of these numbers reflect some of that. And Concord's taken more of an industrial and economic development. The opposite is coming into its own on more residential. We haven't had the past and those numbers starting to reflect that. That does shift. Changes.
But just one of the thoughts I had last month when we started talking about this allocation was again, talking about Midland and how much capacity of Concord that they actually use and that it may be worth considering kind of sort of treating them like a separate entity. I don't know what they use from Concord, but I feel like looking at it from that perspective, the Concord's kind of penalized for what Midland's good at using. Yeah.
Do we know that number?
I mean, so since the interlocal, so part of our strategy, we entered another agreement with Midland to specifically clear that up with them of how much, we realize that they don't get any out of this and trying to make sure that we didn't get overwhelmed with outside our jurisdiction requests. So we essentially offered them sewer for one project that they were a phased agreement over time for that one project. And it was really a win-win. I think our folks were happy. They were happy with what they got. Now, the complexity, it appears that maybe that project is in limbo. So what that means, that agreement was going to carry us for till the end of that complete build out of that development. So if that doesn't happen, we're probably all going to have to come back to the table and figure out, okay, now what? Because they do have, a couple significant chunks of property that could be developed, pretty dense and would flow to the north just from an existing pump station that is already in place down there from development of the past. So I guess we know what we've given them. But that might change in the near future, but we don't expect to give them any more. They got a lot more than they would have gotten any other way. If that makes sense. So if they had had a seat at the table when we were doing percentages, they got a pretty sweet deal numbers wise.
We're sort of on a smaller scale in the same boat with Landis, even though they're not in the discussion here, but they send some sewer this way. And there's some large properties that are on our jurisdiction borders that, at some point will naturally flow this way. So how we deal with them is very similar. I haven't asked for a board seat or anything.
And one of the other things we need to keep in mind is the jurisdictions have their internal reserves, and we're not aware of those, and nobody's aware of the other ones. So you may have allocated internally all your capacity to a certain specific project. They haven't gotten to the point of low acceptance yet. So
I know that's our
yeah,
case.
I know, you
Yeah,
just
we-
need to make sure as you're talking about, well, they haven't submitted their request, or maybe they've internally reserved it, as you said. They haven't gotten to the point yet where they can do full acceptance.
Yeah, and we got what I think is fairly aggressive. So we will not review your construction drawings until you get your preliminary sewer. So you can do it at risk, but you can't submit them. And then once you get preliminary sewer, you have a year to get to final flow acceptance. So we kind of modeled that to try to prevent people from just sitting on stuff.
That was a big
And
concern.
we've had some that have not met their deadline and has gone back in our bucket.
We're in the exact same boat.
Like, come on, let's go.
We've done, virtually all of ours have been through a development agreement. It's very specific about their timeframes
Yeah.
per policy, and we probably have a few that don't do that. Other thoughts or discussion about this topic? I'm not sure we've reached any conclusions, but good discussion.
Yeah, I think we need to keep brainstorming it before, and I think we need to have our,
Yeah, we need the other, yeah, they need to be at the table, so.
so we gotta have unanimous agreement, go back out to the jurisdictions.
Well, maybe we add this to the agenda again next meeting and make sure they get the copy of all this, and then,
Yeah, we'll reach out and I'll offer to Rob and to Mr. Sills to meet with them and go through this data
That's good.
before the next meeting, so they're not just having to read the PowerPoint. So we'll make that offer to them so they'll come heard the same thing.
good deal. All right, any other thoughts or questions? All right, we'll move on. We got the quarterly reports, anything to add to it? Just information?
Be glad to answer any questions you have.
Anybody have any questions beyond that? Okay, we will roll on, hearing none. Chad?
It's gonna be much quicker and a lot less numbers, and all good news. I just want to give you our standard update here on the construction project. You can't hardly move without running into a construction worker or a piece of equipment on the site right now. It is, they literally have something going on everywhere. So they continue with a lot of crews on site. They have completed the last wall pour on aeration basin 6, so that's a big milestone to get that completed. That sub that we had on that job was an absolute rock star. It was amazing to watch them work. And they did a great job. Crowder continues excavation for the EQ basin. They're a good bit of rock they're dealing with there. Had to do some blasting there and a good bit of rock to deal with. The new maintenance canopy pad has been completed. Continue work on the new F1 flume, as I'll show you in the pictures here in a second. It's a pretty big job down there. Continuing excavation for box 101 that'll tie the equalization basin discharges into the influent line to bring that flow back into the plant. We continue to get early procured equipment in, and we continue to work as a team to try to mitigate sourcing issues. I probably should add for phase 3 and 4 now, because we've really started getting into the procurement for items for phase 4 at this time. This is picture of the aeration basin. Again, it's hard to show from the ground, but they have completed their wall pours for that entire site. I'm not sure, I should have grabbed how many cubic yards of concrete went into this, but it was a lot. to know how many tons of rebar and how much concrete there is, it's pretty amazing, for that, because when you start taking a look of, that those are people right there, you know, and like right there in the yellow is a person. So, you know, these discharges, I don't know how big they are, but I mean, this is big stuff, that we're dealing with here. Maintenance pad canopy, last month on the left, this month on the right. So they've completed, tore down all their forming and getting ready for the metal structure there. This is that box 101 excavation. It's a pretty deep hole. They have to, so this shoring here that they put this shoring in as they go down. They actually end up at a point where they have a little mini X in there that's excavating, and they keep adding rings as they go down and reinforcing it. And that shoring actually stays in place once the excavation is done. See, and that is digging down onto the, what's the size line is that?
66.
Yeah, 66-inch gravity sewer there, that we will be tying in the EQ basin discharge. So flow that goes to the EQ will come back into this, and this pipe flows into the main pumping station. This right here on the left is work that was done where we were at last month on this flume. This is down where the new effluent flume's going. So this box was built this month, and then it's hard to see kind of from here. I didn't include the other picture, but this is the 72-inch.
Yes.
72-inch gravity sewer. This is a bridge that's supporting it, because that line's actually going to have to be kind of a dog hole, manhole put on that kind of structure to bring the new flume off of that to measure effluent as it leaves the plant. So pretty big task right there. For the next month, they're going to continue excavation for the EQ and facility, continue working on box 101. They'll continue work with the aeration basin. We've got the concrete poured, but now there's a whole lot of work that still needs to go within that structure. They'll continue work at the plume and chlorine contact basin, and continue work on the new maintenance canopy. I could probably list 2 or 3 slides here of every little thing that they're working on out there, but this is the biggest items that we have going on. I would say from our updates from a contractor, we're still on schedule. There's still the concern of equipment sourcing, weather impacts, those type of things, but we are still on schedule, and everything is progressing along nicely out there.
Let's see, you've already exceeded your estimated rain days. Is that in one of the reports?
I don't know about that.
Well, we've had a lot of rain.
Yeah.
So that may be kind of internal tracking for them, but
Yeah.
they're plugging.
I haven't seen too many days that haven't been working.
No, it has to be a complete washout
Yeah.
in our experience. They're not-
Some contractors look for an excuse to call it a rain day. They're down there on some of those days that it was misty, nasty, wind blowing, and they're tying rebar and climbing those walls, tying rebar, and they.
Next week, got the 2 gen sets coming.
Okay, yeah, the two new big generators are coming in next week. Those were long lead time items that we purchased early with the fear that they wouldn't get here on time. Well, now they're here plenty early, but they're preparing the pads for those. So go ahead and set those, and good thing is when you get that equipment, you can go and get it installed.
Do they use drones to document their construction at all?
They have some, their electrical, the electrical part of Crowder, they use drones a good bit, so they've got some photos with that.
We're planning on doing an update sometime in the next couple months with Crowder coming in and our contractor. They've got a 3D model that's really going to show how a lot of these facilities are going to look once they're completed. And take a look at that, and we'll probably have some aerial photos of that, of where construction's at the end, and let the contractor actually talk to you about what's going on so far and what their challenges are to be done by next spring. So that is on the book for one of the next couple board meetings.
It just gives a very good perspective. I was just looking at the R. Brown McAllister construction from each cardinal direction, and I imagine you get a lot of complaints at the city about how large that is, because there are some people who backed up to woods for years and they no longer back up to woods. Give a really nice perspective.
Yeah, it does. And like, for example, like the EQ basin excavation, and those areas, you can't get to a spot where you can really see on a picture. You can get out there on the site and you can get a feel for it, but to get a picture that really makes you appreciate it stuff.
Footprint of the work compared to your existing plant. I think
Yes.
it's got to be
Yes.
pretty impressive.
Yes.
So do you anticipate manpower kind of falling off a little since all the concrete work at the EQ basins kind of tied up?
So we've still got a 5 million gallon EQ basin to be poured and constructed. There's a lot of civil work that's gonna have to take place, piping, running all this, the big pipe, and what is it, 48 inch?
That's a lot of 42,
Yeah,
like
a
42.
lot of 42 inch gravity that's going over to the EQ basins, going back to that box 101. There's a lot of work still to go.
Is there any soil stabilization? Stuff going on with it?
They did on some of the excavations for the aeration basin and some of those areas. Yeah, there has been. And that's one of the reasons they did that with that shoring system on several of those, because you could go very vertical. You didn't have to. And kept your footprint down on those excavations significantly. And then we have already, part of phase 4 is the installation of the gravity thickeners. Well, that was actually included in part of phase 3. So that's one that they're going to start construction on as they move. And that kind of bridges that gap of getting something that's needed for phase 4, but getting it started and built and out of the way. So then they're ready to go, really from a manpower standpoint, keep them busy. They're as good as any contractor I've ever seen of keeping things scheduled and keeping people moving and keeping 8 or 10 different things going on the site at one time. They're as good as I've seen.
Refresh our memory, the overlap with phase 3 and 4 time frame. I mean, I know it's sort of a gray area, but
Right. Then I said the gravity things are gonna probably start in the fall.
Yes, and they will go into late 2024,
Yeah.
maybe even early 2025.
Right.
So by that time, I think the remainder of phase 4 should be
Right.
kind of working its way along.
And we're probably, I would say less than 6 months away from, coming to the board for some early procurement type GMPs for phase 4. To go ahead and start getting some things where there's no plan to finish phase 3 before we start phase 4. So as soon as the design's complete and work can start taking place and manpower is available and areas are open enough that they can start that work, then we're gonna start the work. And so, those will be, we'll start bringing those probably within 9 months for sure, but probably this summer. We'll start talking on GMPs for phase 4.
have a question for Chad? Okay, thank you, Chad. All right, public comments. Anybody would like to speak to the board? Doesn't look like it. All right, hearing none, we need a motion to go into closed session. Yes, 143, 318, and A1 and A3. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.